All right, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangouts. My name is John Mueller. I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst here at Google in Switzerland. And part of what we do is talk with webmasters and publishers like the ones here in the Hangouts and the ones that submitted tons of sites to check out. So what I did here is a very brief kind of presentation about some of the issues that I found there. Some of you submitted lots of information in the site clinic, and I'd almost prefer to send you something, a response back directly. So one thing you could do is post in the help forum to either get advice from other people, other webmasters who might be in similar situations, or just send me the note that you submitted for the site clinic directly on Google+, and I can try to see if I can get you some information there too. All right, let's get started. So I looked at about 30 of the sites that were submitted. I selected them kind of randomly using Google Spreadsheets random number generator and filtered mostly for brick and mortar businesses, which is kind of tricky because a lot of businesses are active mostly online, but they're actually physically located somewhere. So where do you categorize those? Of the ones that I reviewed, most of them were mobile friendly. So that was a great start. Let's take a quick look at some of the things I looked at for these sites. This is obviously, I think, a rough way to start, and after you look at some of these general categories, you really need to dig into the specifics of the actual site. What makes this site unique, and what's kind of different compared to other sites? So one thing I looked at is crawling. Is that roughly okay? Indexing. Are we roughly indexing the content that appears to be on the site? Are we crawling enough to kind of keep up with indexing? Manual actions. These are visible in Search Console. Does it kind of work? So I checked these all on a phone browser. I use the Chrome mobile emulator to look at these sites. I think that probably makes sense because most of the time, or at least in a lot of cases, more of the users are actually using mobile phones themselves, so you need to check where the users are. I looked at the queries that these sites rank for to get a rough understanding of, are they mostly brand-oriented queries? Are they kind of mostly broad queries? Does the site have matching content for these queries, or is it kind of ranking accidentally? Or is it not ranking for queries where it should be ranking? Then I looked at geo-targeting, specifically Hreflang, to see if that was roughly set up correctly. This is something that's kind of easy to check in Search Console as well. And then I looked at something that's, I think, probably not so typically SEO topic, but is it kind of understandable? If you open the page in a browser, would a user understand what the site is about? If they clicked on a search result, do they feel kind of at home and understand what they're looking at and where they need to go from there? So starting with crawling, which is, I guess, the basic foundation that you need to show up in search, we limit crawling based on the server. So we try to avoid causing problems with the server with other users on the server. So we watch out for things like response code, server-side errors, network issues, timeouts. And when we see a mass of these, we'll assume that we're crawling too much and we'll slow down. This is a bit trickier now because for each HTML page that your site has, we actually have to try to render this page to see what it actually looks like. That means we have to pull in a lot more content from your server to look at each page individually. Very few sites had problems here because I guess most servers are pretty awesome nowadays and can kind of keep up with the load that Googlebot and lots of users put on it. So that was a good thing. But for sites where you do think this is a problem, solutions could be to kind of attack this from multiple sides. On the one hand, you can just get a better server, get a CDN, host things so that they're faster. The other thing you can do is to kind of avoid Googlebot having to access all of these resources anyway. So you could put fewer embedded resources on a page. You could make sure that the embedded resources are easier cacheable so that they're smaller, that they have cache headers where appropriate. And you can make sure that your site has less duplicate content. So in general, for most sites, when we look at duplicate content, having something like, I don't know, 2-3 times the number of URLs as you have content generally isn't a problem. And that's something that a lot of sites have, like www, non-www. Technically, that's duplicate content. We could crawl those URLs twice and find the same information. If you have 10 times, that's obviously a little bit of a bigger issue. But the real problems kind of come up when we see things like, I don't know, 100 times the duplicate content, where theoretically we'd have to crawl 100 times all of the URLs to actually get everything. And some of the sites that had problems with regards to crawling were these here, listed on the bottom. So if these are your sites, you might want to look into ways to kind of make it easier for Googlebot to actually crawl your content. The other thing with regards to speed is obviously it's not just Googlebots kind of accessing the individual URLs, but users want something reasonable and fast too. One of the sites that was submitted was really awesomely fast. The UI is a bit clunky. I'd say it's kind of hard to use sometimes, but it's amazingly fast. You can click around, and it just kind of loads almost instantly. And another site that was submitted was really, really slow. And that's something where you'll probably see users kind of jumping off and not kind of digging into your site as much. The other thing to keep in mind is now that we render pages as well, we have the same problem here. So if a page renders really slow, then that means we might not be able to render this page directly in one go. We might have to kind of take multiple tries to actually get this content so that we have it in our index. Whereas if a page renders really quickly, has few requests, that's something that we can pick up and index the content a lot faster. Webpage.org is a testing tool that you can use for this. It creates these nice waterfall diagrams, also videos of your page loading. That's something I definitely recommend looking into and seeing what that pulls up with your site. Mobile friendly is, of course, a big topic. Most of the sites were mobile friendly. You can test your own sites or pages from your site using our mobile friendly testing tool, which is linked here. The other thing to keep in mind here, though, is that it's not just from a technical point of view, but you really want to make sure that it's actually usable on a mobile device. So some of the things I found were, for example, interstitials on mobile, which are really painful because how do you click that stupid X to make that interstitial go away? And everything loads a lot slower because of this extra interstitial that's loaded. Sometimes the user interface isn't really that easy to understand and to figure out. And sometimes things like images are really hard to recognize as well, where the testing tool will say, well, this is an image. It's fine to have an image here. But as in this case here, this image has almost microscopic text on it. And it's almost like you'd want to read what's on this image, but you can't really read it at all. So these are things to watch out for, where technically a site might be mobile friendly, but from a practical point of view, it's not really that friendly. Another thing I noticed with at least one of the sites was that we were indexing some of the mobile URLs. So specifically, if you have separate mobile URLs, make sure that you have everything set up properly, that you have the rel canonical from the mobile version back, that you have the link element from the desktop to the mobile page, so that we can understand this kind of connection between the desktop and the mobile pages, and kind of make sure that we're able to understand that properly. And that's something you won't necessarily see in the testing tool, because the testing tool checks for, technically, does this page load as a mobile-friendly page? It doesn't check for the situation where is this really, from an indexing point of view, recognizable as being mobile-friendly. Manual actions, web spam. None of the sites had manual actions. No web spam in the sites that I reviewed, which was really fantastic. Some sites had some older quality issues or older link issues. For example, this site here still has a bunch of really spammy links that are really old, that are really pulling the site down. So that's something you might want to clean up to make sure that you're ready for the next web spam algorithm update. Understandability. I kind of mentioned this in the beginning. I think this is something that a lot of small businesses sometimes have trouble with, and it kind of comes back from the general situation where a lot of small businesses don't really understand what kind of their unique selling proposition is. What's the unique thing that they offer that makes their business unique, that means that kind of the reason why people should come to your website. And if you don't have this really visible on your web pages from the start, then people who come to your pages might not really recognize that this is actually what they're looking for. And these are some of the pages that I ran across from the site clinic, which were submitted, where I'd say, well, I might be able to figure out what some of these pages are about, or if I dug in and kind of browsed around a bit, I'd understand what it is that they're really trying to offer me. But at first glance, it's really hard to tell. And the sad thing here, I think, is that for some of these sites, they're really well-made sites, otherwise really nice to look at. They have a lot of content, but the average user, when they come to this page and they don't really know what to do, they can easily get lost. And here's some comparison, for example, some of the other sites that were submitted where maybe they don't look as fancy, but it's really easy for people to understand what it is that they can do here, what they can click on, what this kind of site offers, what kind of services or products that you're selling. And this is kind of reflected on our side in search as well, in that if you don't tell us what you're actually offering, what you're really fantastic at as a business, then that makes it really hard for us to figure out what we should rank your site for. So kind of tell us what you'd like to rank for, what you'd like to offer people, what you want people to search for your site for. It also makes it a lot easier for us to pick a good title and a snippet, because if we have that text on the page, we can choose that. And of course, like I mentioned, it's easier for users to understand what they landed on, which kind of means that you're not just ranking for that first click. You're kind of ranking because people are actually going into your website and looking around a bit more. So it's something where the ranking that you have isn't something that, how can I say, it holds people back almost from kind of coming in and converting and actually buying something, but rather they're able to come in and understand what your site is about, use it properly, and then move on to conversion, because that's kind of what you really want. You don't want to show up in rankings. You want people to come to your business and actually buy something, right? Another thing I noticed, which kind of came up here and there with the sites that were submitted, these were two kind of sample questions that were in the comments that were submitted, is people that want to rank for their brand name and people that say, I can't rank unless people search for my brand name. And that kind of comes back to, I guess, a general competition question with regards to, like, the search terms that you're trying to target. Is that something that your site is actually able to rank for? Does your site have kind of the strength with regards to content, with regards to other signals to rank for those queries? So if you're trying to target a market that's already really saturated with some really good players, then it's hard to get in there unless you're getting in there by being visible through your brand name, for example. So if people can search for your brand name and find your site, then that's a great way to kind of start being active on the web and to kind of get your existing customers to find you on the web, because you can say, well, just first search for my name, you'll find my business, I'll be there. On the other hand, if your brand name is something like in this case here, where it's essentially a business type and a city name, I don't know, Pizza Zurich, for example, then that's going to be really hard to kind of rank as a brand name, because it's actually a combination of generic terms, and it's kind of takes away that advantage of having a brand that people can try to search for. So that's something that's obviously really hard to change afterwards. But if you're looking at the situation where you don't rank for anything generic and people can't search for your brand name because it's also too generic, then maybe it makes sense to say, well, I'll find a name that's kind of unique that makes it easier for people to find my website at all on the web. Hreflang, completely different topic. This is more of a technical issue, I'd say. Most of the sites that were submitted didn't use Hreflang. They didn't have anything unique with regards to different languages or countries, which is perfectly fine. You don't have to target all countries individually. Some of them did set up Hreflang properly, which was fantastic to see. And some of them I saw had problems with the way they set up the Hreflang. And the problems with Hreflang, you can almost always see in Search Console. They'll be flagged there. And the issues that are flagged there are actual issues. It's not that we're kind of looking at it from a theoretical point of view. But actually, we tried to crawl this page. We looked at the hreflang. We weren't able to find the matching link, for example. The most common issue I see with hreflang is that it needs to be between the canonical URLs. So if you have one canonical page for, in this case, Irish, and one canonical page for Great Britain, then the hreflang needs to be between those two pages, and we need to kind of understand the canonical that you have and accept that. So in this case here, for example, the Irish page has a slightly different URL than the English page here, and we found the hreflang to the English page here on the Irish page, but we found an hreflang back to a slightly different Irish page from the English page. So this is something where the canonical that was picked up for indexing wasn't the canonical that you wanted to have used for hreflang. And that's sometimes really tricky to figure out where that's coming from. So what I just recommend doing there is, especially if you're using hreflang, make sure that you do everything you can to have the correct canonical selected. That means using rel canonical where you can, using 301 redirects if you know this URL should be replaced by a different one, making sure all of the internal links are pointing at the preferred canonical version, that you have those URLs in your sitemap file as well, so that really all of the signals that we get are pointing at exactly that canonical URL that you want, the canonical URL that you want to have used for the hreflang pairs. And one way you can kind of check that in most cases is just to do an info query for the URL. So just info : and the URL, and then you'll see the URL that we actually pick as a canonical for that specific URL. All right, and I think this is pretty much towards the end, so we move over to questions soon. One issue that I noticed is some sites could use hreflang, but they aren't. You can kind of recognize this on your website if you have multiple language or country versions, and if you're seeing users going to the wrong version of your site. So if you have a German and a Swiss version of your site, and you see Swiss users going to the German version of your site or seeing that as impressions in Search Console, then that's pretty strong sign that people are probably going to the wrong version, and that you could improve that by setting up hreflang. This is particularly common for situations where the same language is used in different countries. So like I said, German, Austria, Switzerland is a local example, I guess. This is probably also the same for Spanish and Spanish in South America. And it's also very common for kind of location type issues where people are searching for a location name, and that could be in multiple variations on your website, and it's hard for us to recognize from the query alone, is the user searching for an English or a German word? And then we'll try to kind of fall back to the user's location and pick the more preferred version there. One thing you can also do with Hreflang is just use it on parts of your site. So you don't have to put it across all of your site. Maybe just pick the important landing pages, or just pick the pages where you see that this is kind of being mixed up in search, so that we can focus on those pages to kind of start off with. And here are two example sites where I thought maybe setting up Hreflang for at least some of the pages would be helpful. All right, that kind of leads us to the end here. Like I mentioned in the beginning, if you have more questions, if you submitted a big chunk of text in your site clinic request, I'd recommend, first of all, trying to post in the Webmaster Help Forum or one of the other Webmaster forums out there to get advice from other people. But you're also welcome to send me the link to your forum thread directly, for example, on Google+, and I can take a look from there.
John, regarding redirects, suppose you had underscores, which you guys don't like, but I mean, and you redirect those to dashes the way it's supposed to be done. So if you, well, I mean, there was a Matt Cutts video where he was saying that you could still leave them. You don't necessarily need to hit 301 them, but suppose you went with what you guys like. Can that really hurt the site's ranking within like a couple of weeks? Suppose you did it like, let's say, 3 weeks ago, you redirect everything properly, plus you made the proper changes, so for for duplications and so on, panda-free kind of so-called site, and can it hurt rankings pretty hard after a couple of weeks?
So I guess first of all, we don't really care about underscore versus dashes, so that's something where I wouldn't bother setting up redirects for something like that. If the site is set up in one way and you think the other way would be nicer, obviously you could do that, but I don't think you'd see a significant kind of positive effect in search from that alone.
No, the point wasn't for a positive ranking. It's just that can it hurt ranking is my question.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing to keep in mind there is essentially you're doing a site structure change of the URLs on your site. So we don't recognize that you're just like flipping out characters there. We see these are completely different URLs, and if you change your internal linking structure and the URLs that you're using on your website, then we kind of have to re-crawl and re-index the whole website to understand it again and the context of the individual pages. It's kind of the same if you go from, I don't know, .php to .html, or you remove the .php completely. We run across completely new URLs, and we don't understand kind of intuitively this relationship between the old version and the new version. We just see these are new URLs. There are redirects there. The internal linking structure changed significantly. We have to kind of reevaluate the site. And that could result in, after some time, definitely seeing some fluctuations for where things kind of need to settle down. And in the long run, I think you'll see everything come back to the same place again. Mm-hmm. But it can definitely take, I don't know, a couple of weeks maybe to kind of settle down again.
Okay, and also the last question is regarding schemas. How often are the updates? So suppose you change certain things for this e-commerce website, and yeah, I mean they have 100 reviews and they had like 60 or whatever in the rating. Basically, let's say you made some changes to your schema. How long would it take for that to take effect?
Usually pretty much when we crawl. So we have to recrawl and reindex those pages, but it's kind of like content on your pages, where if you change the content, once we've been able to reindex that updated content, we should be able to take that into account immediately. Okay, there's no additional delay from there.
Because I fetched it and nothing I don't see anything. Okay, I guess I'll just give it another week.
John, you mentioned the info command to help with figuring out the rel hreflang. So could you show an example of how that will work with, let's say, amazon.de or something like that? I was curious.
You can just do info : and the URL. For example, probably info : google.com, and you'll probably see I don't know, whichever URL we have canonical for google.com, which is https://google.com.
So if I put in like amazon.de, they don't have proper things set up. That it says maybe I'm understanding it wrong. I thought you could quickly see.
No, you basically see if that's the URL that we have chosen as the canonical.
Okay.
It doesn't check for the hreflang or anything like that. It's just a kind of a rough and dirty check to see if this is the canonical URL. And there's some kind of situations where that doesn't match exactly, but for the most part, it gives you a good idea. For example, is www non-www with like a trailing slash or no trailing slash to kind of see which one we chose.
Is it better to create sites like for locally, like in Zurich, for instance, instead of the same site in different areas, just more catering to, this crowd and that crowd. Like it doesn't have to. Would you guys appreciate that more if it's each site is unique to its own location?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the question is kind of are these equivalent for us? So for a user in this location, is this the equivalent version of the site? Like, I don't know, if you take, let's say, Amazon DE and Amazon.com, those home pages are for the average user essentially equivalent. So they can kind of dig into different parts of the site. And obviously, if someone is searching for something in German, then they probably want the German version. I don't know if Amazon has everything set up properly, so I'm kind of cautious to use that as an example. All right, let me just run through some of the questions that were submitted through the Site Clinic as well, and then we'll go to the Q&A of the questions that were submitted in the Hangout, which are even more questions. Let's see, I'm concerned that my being based in 5 locations is affecting my ability to be ranked as well as possible in any one of them. In general, that's not a problem that you'd need to worry about. One thing I do there, though, is kind of see if you can have the shared information on one really strong place, and then just list the individual locations separately. So, for example, you'd have one page about your business, about the type of work, the type of services that you do, the type of products that you have, and then the individual locations each kind of have an individual landing page, but they're focused on that location. They're not focused on the generic information you have there. So that way you have really strong pages about the type of business that you do, and you have kind of focused pages on the locations, but you don't duplicate the type of work that you do on all of the individual location pages.
But related to that question, let's say you have you're like a hotel chain and you have multiple hotels in different cities. Would you prefer using a subfolder for each location versus a subdomain? I'm asking for a friend who has that set up with subdomains. I recommend they go with subfolders so the signals kind of go into the right places.
Subdomain or subdirectory, it's kind of up to you. From my point of view, you could use either one, and sometimes there might be marketing reasons where you say, well, I want to do it like this, or maybe there are technical reasons where you say, I want to keep everything in the same CMS, and then I have to put everything in subdirectories. It's more of something that I'd say is up to you.
Okay, let's assume that the client has both options, doesn't care which one, he can do both. It's the same thing to him. What would you choose? What would you recommend?
So recommend subdomains or subdirectories. From my point of view, I'd go for subdirectories just because it's easier to maintain. It's kind of easier to track. It's easier to expand. You don't have to worry about setting up separate sites, just from a practical point of view. But that's, I don't know. That's kind of up to you.
But from a ranking signals point of view, is there any difference? For example, domain-wide signals transfer better to subfolders versus subdomains. Are there cases where you think subdomains might be different websites altogether?
Not really. Not really. So the thing there is we try to recognize if these are essentially separate sites or if it's the same site. And when we try to recognize that on a subdomain as well as on a subdirectory level. So it's not the case that we'd say, well, if you put it on a subdirectory, then it'll look like one site. Our algorithms might look at that and say, oh, these are like separate hosting things. They need to be treated as separate sites.
Okay, but multiple big agencies need some tests, for example, from blog.example.com to example.com/blog, and they saw quite a big increase in traffic and rankings with the blog section. So do you think there's anything to that, or it's just coincidence?
I don't know. I'd have to look at the actual example.
Yeah.
Your audio is really bad.
Sorry.
We're building a lot of content on the blog. Must we do link building? No, you don't need to do link building. In general, we kind of expect sites to kind of stand on their own and to kind of grow on their own. It's not something where you artificially have to do link building to get traffic. We've been a target of negative SEO and would like to see if our efforts to remove disavow have been seen. So I looked at this site-specific case, and from what I saw, it looked like you were doing a good job, and I don't see the negative SEO causing any problems there. Let's see. We lost our previous domain name and started a new one. We kept the same structure and improved some content. The old domain is now parked without any content. Does Google still see this as the same website? No. If there are no redirects from the old version to the new one and the old version is kind of standing on its own now, then we would treat these as separate websites. So with the new website, you kind of have to get that set up again and kind of get the ball rolling there again. So this is a good reminder to make sure that you pay your domain names and set up calendar reminders that you don't accidentally lose a domain name. I'm worried in terms of speed. I checked different tools, and I found my site is great, but is it good in Google's eye as well? How important is speed? So this is something where, from my point of view, speed is definitely important, and we did say that it's a ranking factor, but it's not something where you have to focus on the milliseconds and say, oh, I got 10 milliseconds more, therefore my ranking will be like a slot higher. It doesn't go like that. We essentially look at sites and see, is this significantly slower than everything else, or is this kind of in the normal range? And if it's kind of in the normal range, then the speed tweaks that you do essentially have a stronger effect on what people do on your website. So if they kind of browse around and they end up buying something from your business or not, which is probably your ultimate goal, and less to do with the actual search ranking. So if your site is 100 milliseconds faster than your competitors, you're not going to be ranking above them just because of that speed advantage. Why don't my pages have any rich snippets in the search results? I set up the structured data. I didn't look at this specific site, but in general, for structured data and rich snippets, we look at three things. On the one hand, is it technically correct, implemented in the correct way? On the other hand, is it implemented in a correct way from kind of a general policy point of view? And is a site such that we can actually trust it enough that we show rich snippets? So those are kind of the three things to look at. From a technical point of view, it's easy to test with a testing tool. From kind of a policy point of view, it's something that the testing tool doesn't really pull up that much. So if you put, for example, recipe markup on a page about, I don't know, on an SEO blog, then that's probably not what we're looking for. That's something where you can probably get advice from other peers to see, is this really the content, the type of markup that matches your pages or not? And the general quality issue, I'd say, is almost the trickiest, but in many cases, it's kind of obvious. If the website is really lower quality, then that's something where you need to kind of work on. Or in general, if it's something where you say, well, the other two are definitely covered well, and I'm implementing the markup right on the right type of pages, then quality is something that could be kind of like a long-term goal where you can continue working at it to kind of keep it getting it better. We're concerned the site is not being indexed correctly due to query parameters. How do we treat query parameters? So in general, query parameters are fine. URLs with parameters in them, we accept them without a problem. We should be able to crawl and index these pages directly. You can double check that with Search Console and the Fetch as Google tool. Enter your URL with the parameters that you have and see if Google can pull up the content directly. And if Google can pull up the content there, if it can render those pages, then we should be able to index those pages as well. All right. Time to move over to the next batch of questions which were submitted. Let me just see if I can get the order based on the kind of rough votes, I guess, on a pluses. Doesn't seem to show in the right order, but fine. We'll just start here. We've acquired 2 of our competitors who rank on page 1 for the same keyword, but since the purchase, the rankings start to drop. Is there any algorithm which detects domain crowding? Yes, we do try to recognize when sites are essentially the same or kind of focus on the same thing or run by the same company and try to fold those into one site. So that's something you might be seeing there where essentially we recommend just having one really strong site rather than trying to create multiple sites that would rank separately. You said in the past that cross-linking a big amount of websites could look spammy. Would this be the same for international websites which use a Hreflang tag, and therefore Google needs to know that they're related? We have over 80 international sites. Hreflang is perfectly fine. So because what happens with Hreflang is the ranking of these pages doesn't change. It's just we show the right version of the page. And if you have 80 versions of the same page, and which are essentially equivalent that we could swap out, then that could be providing a really great user experience for people in those countries where you do have those versions. So that's something that I think could be really useful. Our main navigational links are generated by Ajax and don't appear in the source code, nor when using fetch and render. Would Google see them if we add them in the source code as an ahref with a display none while still serving them to users with Ajax? So we should be able to see links that are generated by Ajax. And if we're not able to see those pages with those links with fetch and render, then I try to look into what's actually happening there that prevents Googlebot from seeing those links. Because I almost recommend not focusing on content that's hidden because it makes it really hard for us to figure out, is this really relevant for this page? But rather making sure that those pages can be rendered properly with the full content with all of those links as well. So that's kind of something where I take one of these sample pages and kind of try to strip it out into multiple parts and figure out which part of your configuration is blocking Googlebot from actually seeing those links. Do you treat affiliate links the same as links to external domains, the same as pages on the same domain, or is there a difference? I know I have to make great quality site for users. I'm just asking about the links. So obviously, great quality sites is one of the most obvious issues that we run across with regards to affiliates. In general, we treat those links the same. The one thing I'd watch out for with affiliate links is that you put a nofollow on them so that we know that there's kind of a monetary relationship here, that we can take them out of our link graph, essentially. For many cases, we recognize that automatically and kind of treat them as nofollow anyway, so essentially they would be the same. But with regards to an affiliate site, if you have links to kind of the affiliate source where people can actually buy the content, that's not something I'd worry about. I just put a nofollow on there, and then that would be generally fine. Is there a maximum number of requests per page? No, there isn't. It's fairly rare that I see Googlebot kind of running into a situation where we can't render a page because of the number of requests per page. But you can kind of test that with Fetch and Render tool. And you can also look at things like the waterfall diagram on webpagetest.org and try to kind of compare it to other sites that you're seeing out there to see that you're kind of in a reasonable range. Sometimes it also depends on what kind of requests are in there, if they're able to be cached or not, if they're from other hosts that are actually really fast. All of this kind of comes together. We're planning to launch a new shop, but unsure how many pages we should index. There are different sizes, colors, materials, etc. Is it intelligent to combine every value with each other and let it all be indexed, or is it too much? What would you recommend? This is something where there is no answer to, or no absolute answer to all of the cases here. What I'd recommend doing is kind of taking a step back and looking at the pages that you have and thinking, is this really something that can stand on its own? So would I make a page for a blue shoe in this model for this size? Would I make a page separately for that? Or would it make more sense to kind of have one more general page, maybe a step back and saying, well, all sizes, male and female on one page, or maybe I split it by male and female, those kind of things. So is this something that would stand on its own or not? And in some cases, you kind of drill down a little bit further because you know this is one very specific thing that people want just like that. And then it makes sense maybe to have a separate page. And sometimes you say, well, people generally just want this vague kind of thing here, and I have all of these variations, different sizes, colors on the same page, and that kind of helps solve their problem as well. Are shops treated differently compared to other sites? Does Google recognize that a site is a shop and ranks it higher for buying-related search queries? Is it a problem that shops mostly have less textual content than normal sites? On first hand, I'd say shops are treated the same as generally any other kind of site, but we do try to recognize when someone is specifically looking for a product, and we'll try to kind of bubble up those kind of more product, more shop-oriented pages in a case like that. So that's not something where you need to put things like, oh, this is a web shop on top. In general, we can pick that up fairly well. With regards to shops generally having less textual content than other sites, that's perfectly fine. You don't need to write a novel on every page. And even for normal sites, sometimes like just a small paragraph of information is enough to make this page relevant. So you don't need to focus on a minimum word count per page. 3 years ago, we had a domain that got a manual penalty, attempted many times to resolve, disavow, etc. Little success. What should we do now that it's been a few years? I'm not completely sure what you mean with regards to little success. If kind of cleaning up wasn't that successful, or you didn't see that much of an improvement in the search results. If cleaning up wasn't that successful, maybe that's something you could tackle again, or someone else could tackle again. If you're just not seeing results in the search results, then that's obviously a little bit trickier. With some things, if you're looking at something that's been in place for multiple years, you need to also assume that maybe things have changed in search, in that where your site was ranking 3 or 4 years ago isn't where it would be ranking now, even with like all of the cleanup taken into account. So that's one thing to kind of look at. Like, is my site really still relevant for these queries, or has the web kind of moved on and changed significantly since then? And obviously, that means maybe it's a little bit harder, that you have to take a step back and say, well, I have to rethink what my offering is, what I want to provide on the web, or how I provide it on the web. That's something sometimes you kind of have to take into account. And for other things, it's also possible that it just takes a lot longer for things to kind of change when you clean things up on the web. So specifically, since you mentioned disavow and deleting links, that's something where, on the one hand, the manual actions might get resolved fairly quickly, or depending on how much work was done here. But things like algorithmic changes sometimes take a little bit longer to take effect. Can you explain the discrepancy between Google Analytics and Search Console search query data, even though Google Analytics is pulling this data from Search Console? I'm not sure exactly what you're suggesting there. One thing, of course, is the general Google Analytics data, which is collected on the site directly with the Analytics JavaScript itself. That's obviously based on kind of what users are doing when they come to the website. So that's something that might not be reflected in Search Console, because in Search Console, we only look at the search side, the impressions, the number of times that the site was shown, and the clicks through to the site. And even the clicks through to the site might not match exactly what Google Analytics and the JavaScript side is tracking. So that's something where you'll definitely always see a slight discrepancy. The other part is, I believe in Analytics, it's the SEO report, I'm not sure on the exact name, where you see the Search Console data itself. One thing that's different in Analytics is that it explicitly bubbles up the queries that were filtered out in Search Console. So we filter out things where a query maybe was only done once, and we might filter that out for privacy reasons. And in Search Console, you'll see that in that the top number in impressions will show one number, and if you add up all of the individual rows, you might come up with a different number. So maybe you'll see, I don't know, 90 if you add up the rows, and 100 is shown on top as impressions. And that's kind of the difference between the URLs that were, or the queries that were filtered. And in Analytics, that's split out separately. I believe it's called not set or something like that. Where you see one row with this number. So in this case, in this example, you'd see kind of those 90, which were the individual queries, and that one row with 10 impressions for the filtered out ones. So that's one of the differences you might be seeing there.
John, is there any chance you'll be able to integrate the not set thingy into Search Analytics as well? Something like filtered query or something like that?
Yeah. You're not the first person to suggest that, yes. I don't know what the specific plans are there. I can't make any promises, but this is something that people have mentioned before as well. Wow, still tons of questions left and so little time. What's the reason sites always lose organic search visibility when moving domains as opposed to replatforming without changing domains? I don't know. So in general, you should be able to do a site move without seeing a significant drop in search value. But this is something where if you do a site move, sometimes it just takes a little bit longer for everything to settle down in the new state. Can you clarify if 301 redirecting a domain will pass a penalty? I asked about a weird domain from China redirecting to my site a year ago, and you said it would not pass the penalty, but last week on the Webmaster Hangout, you implied that it would. So I think there are two different situations here. On the one hand, some random website that's redirecting to your website, that's something that we generally ignore. On the other hand, if you take your website and redirect it to another new website where you're essentially moving from one domain to another, not just kind of like randomly redirecting to some existing website, then that's the case where we might pass on the penalty information, the manual actions, the algorithmic issues there as well, especially if they're based on the links. Of course, also on the content, if you move all of your content and the manual action is based on the content, then that's something that also makes sense to kind of apply to the new domain. All right, let me just open it up for more questions from you all. What else is on your mind?
I've got a quick question, John, if that's all right.
All right, go for it.
In terms of backlinks, there's a lot of like companies who talk about regularly monitoring your backlinks and entering them for disavow. Is that something we should be doing on a regular basis, like every month, every quarter, something like that?
In general, you don't need to do that. So that's something where most of kind of the random weird backlinks that you get on a site are things that we take out of our algorithms anyway, so that's not something you'd need to do. But on the other hand, if you look at your backlinks and you see something really crazy and you're worried that this might have a negative effect on your site, then, I mean, just put it in a disavow file so that you can move on. But for most sites, most businesses, I don't think you need to monitor your backlinks.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, John. Cheers.
Hi, John.
Hi.
I've got a link-related question as well. So, in our industry, in the last 12 months, there were a couple of websites that are coming up without significantly doing the SEO you actually want us to do. So that means they are just doing everything what you actually don't want us to do, and they are being successful. And my question is actually the link-related filters such as penguins and stuff still effective? And why, if yes, why they are actually not detecting those kind of websites?
So I guess the question is general. You see people doing web spam and getting by with it.
Get away from it.
Yeah. So from our point of view, we do still focus on these issues. We do still take manual action on them. We do still take algorithmic action on these things. But sometimes things kind of can get through. So that's one thing where maybe a web spam report will help us to kind of figure that out, hear about that, or be able to take action on that manually.
Okay, thank you.
All right. One quick mention again for those that submitted in the Site Clinic and they sent me this big chunk of text. If you want to post in the help forums and link to your thread there or send me that directly on Google+, feel free to do that. I think for some of you there might still be some questions open, and I'm happy to kind of help out where I can there. All right. I need to move on. But it's been great having you all here. Thank you all for all of the sites that were submitted. I think maybe we need to figure out a way to do this in a more systematic way with site clinics, because there's just so many questions that are coming in and so many sites that didn't kind of match the pattern that we were looking for who also have questions. So we'll try to see if we can figure something out there as well. Thank you all for the questions here as well, for joining us live. And maybe I'll see you guys again in one of the future Hangouts.
Thank you, John.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers, John.